So as we talk about the practices that bring self-renewal and regeneration to ministers and to pastors and people serving out in various nonprofit mission organizations, there are a couple of spiritual disciplines I'd like to talk about a little bit. And I know many of you already know all this and you've heard this before, so I apologize if this is redundant. For me, these were revelations at certain points along my path. And so when I came to discover these and understand these were significant movements in my growth of faith. So I want to make sure we talk about them a little bit. If you want to talk about spiritual disciplines, there are all kinds of books out there. It's a popular topic. You can read about it. Richard Foster's Celebration of Discipline was probably one of the most famous ones and one of the best-selling ones. It's been all over the world now. But there's all kinds of literature on spiritual disciplines. But there are two disciplines in particular that I want to make sure we call attention to. One of them is the act of Sabbath-keeping. Sabbath-keeping, as you know, is a biblical practice. It began with the creation of the world. In 6 days, God did all of his labor, and on the seventh day, God rested, as if an omnipotent being needs to take a break. I think God rested because it was a model for all of us to see that a healthy life is one lived in cycles of work and rest and work and rest. The world is actually designed to function in a cycle of work and rest. I remember when I first moved out to Hawaii, I went to visit Hanauma Bay, which is this beautiful site with all kinds of snorkeling, amazing fish and eels, and all kinds of fascinating things to see under the water. And I showed up, it was on a Monday or Tuesday, I can't remember which now. But I showed up, and there was a big chain hanging in front of the parking lot out to Hanauma Bay. And it said closed on it. And I thought, well, this is a bay. You can't close just a big open space like this. And I went up to the little guard shack that was there, and there was a woman standing in the shack, and she was protecting the bay. And I said, oh, I'm new here, but I had come and I thought we could go snorkeling. And she says, it's closed today. And I thought, oh, okay. I'm new here, and I'm a pastor. I thought I'd pull any string I could. So I know the guy who made this stuff. And she says, no, you can't come in. The fish are resting. And I didn't even know fish had to rest, but apparently. I don't think they have eyelids. But God has made the world in a cycle of work and rest and work and rest. And even nature shows that. Zoos will actually rotate animals out of their cage, out of the public sight on a regular basis, because they need to be away from all the distraction, all the people and all the noise. And so even the animal kingdom works in a cycle of work and rest and work and rest. God made us that way in the very beginning. God then commands rest. It's in the Ten Commandments. Remember the Sabbath day and keep it holy. 6 days you shall do all your labor, and on the seventh day you shall rest. The Sabbath day reminds us that God can do more in 6 days than we can do in 7. And it's a healthy way of us remembering who we are and how we're made. The most important book I've ever read about the Sabbath was a book called The Sabbath by Abraham Heschel, who was a Jewish rabbi who walked with Martin Luther King Jr. In the Civil Rights March. He was a profound thinker, and it's a beautiful book, maybe 100 pages, tiny little book, but just says incredible, profound things about what Sabbath keeping is for. So Heschel's book, The Sabbath, has these brilliant analogies that describe the purpose of Sabbath keeping. He says it's the one day of the week in which we reorient ourselves back to the Garden of Eden, back to the way the world was created in the first place, to remember who we are, to remember how we were made. It's the recalibration time that points us back towards our origin. Heschel said, imagine the 6 days of the week in an argument with the Sabbath. And the 6 days of the week could look at the Sabbath and say, you're lazy. You just sit around and do nothing. We do all the work. We're the productive ones. We help the economy go, and you just sit around and do nothing. And Heschel says, the Sabbath could reply back, yes, but you all were made for me. I was not made for you. You all were made to allow there to be space for us to return to peace with our Creator, to remember how we're made. And I was not made for you. I was not made so that you could work. Philo, the Jewish philosopher in the first century, got this one wrong, because Philo tried to defend the Jewish Sabbath to the Romans. The Romans worked 7 days a week, and the Jewish people would take 1 day off for their Sabbath. And the accusation was that the Jewish people were lazy. Philo says, well, if you allow us this 1 day off to rest, we will work so much harder the other 6 days of the week that it'll be worth it. You'll find out that based on our hard work that we'll do in those 6 days, giving us the Sabbath day is worth it. It's a fair trade-off. That's actually not, I mean, it's clever reasoning when you're talking to a Roman, but it's actually not what the Sabbath is made for. It's not there so that you can work harder the other 6 days. The 6 days exist for the sake of the Sabbath. The other spiritual discipline that was kind of a revelation to me early on in my faith, and you probably already know these kinds of things, but I remember when I was in my 20s asking a pastor, so what's this fasting thing about? It talks about it in the Bible, but I don't understand why anyone would do it. And he wrongly said, well, if you're hungry, then God will pay attention because it seems like you're really desperate. And I don't think that has anything to do with fasting at all. What fasting does is it cuts off the lesser loves in our lives in order to make us hold out for something of greater satisfaction. You've heard before that C.S. Lewis preached a sermon called The Weight of Glory, one of his great sermons in which he said, the great sin of humanity is not that we desire too much. It's not that we're too greedy or too lustful. It's that we desire too little, and we settle for less than that which will really satisfy our hearts. Fasting cuts off those lesser things that are not as satisfying as what God really wants for us. If you've ever gone out and looked at the night sky, you know that in the middle of the city, I live here in Los Angeles, in the middle of the city, it's hard to see much at all in the night sky. You might see the moon, but you're not going to see much of a starscape up in the sky above you. But I've been out in the deserts of New Mexico at night, far from any city and far from electric lights. And the difference between the sky in the New Mexican desert and the sky in the Los Angeles night is just worlds apart. It is extraordinary what you can see in the desert sky at night. The brilliance of the starscape and the expansiveness and just the number of stars you see in the sky. And that's because you've cut off the electricity. You've cut off the lesser lights. Jesus then promises rest in the New Testament in Matthew. Come to me, all you who are weary and heavy burdened, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you. My burden is light. And so we're commanded to rest in the Ten Commandments, and we're promised rest in Jesus' teaching in the New Testament. We're made for rest, and it's a reorientation back to the God who made us. One of the clever metaphors, clever analogies in Heschel's book, The Sabbath, comes from a rabbi, I believe from the Middle Ages that he quotes, who says that the Sabbath is like this. A prince moves out into the villages outside of the castle and dresses as a pauper and lives among his people, and he befriends them and he loves them. But the day comes where he's summoned back to the castle, and he knows he must go. So before he leaves, he throws a big party in the town square for all of his friends. He throws a party and brings food and drink, and it's this lavish gathering that like they've never seen before. And it's said that the prince, the people celebrate because they have food for a day, and the prince celebrates because he knows he's going home. Heschel says that on the Sabbath day when we rest, our body celebrates because it has a moment to recline, and our souls celebrate because they know they're going home. The Sabbath day is that reminder that our body is not all there is, that there's a bigger promise at the end of the road. And the Sabbath, again, reorients us back towards our origin and our ultimate destination. Fasting cuts off those things that are lesser satisfaction for our souls. And when you look at the night sky from the city, you think, well, it can't be that good. I mean, the electric lights are better and the stars aren't that much to look at. When we look at the things that God calls us to and promises for us, we might think, that looks a little bit less satisfying than money and relationships and popularity and all the joys I can fill my life with. But when you actually cut them off and turn to the real thing, you realize how much you have been missing. And so fasting is that act of cutting off lesser satisfactions to turn to a greater one. I'd say be real careful about fasting. Don't ever cut yourself off from food. If you have any kind of dietary problems or health problems that could aggravate a worse health situation, if you have any kind of medical situations tied to food or anything else, check with a doctor before you fast. But fasting, the first few times you do it, if you abstain from food, say for a day, you'll find that what it makes you is grouchy and hungry and nothing else. The first few times you do it, it really is not a spiritually usually it's not a spiritually enlightening activity. It's one that just frustrates you. I remember trying to meet with a Muslim imam at one point, and it turned out it was during the month of Ramadan where they fast during the daylight hours. And the friend of mine who was trying to pair us up so that we could go meet together said, I don't want you to meet with him during Ramadan. And I said, why not? And he goes, he's kind of grouchy. Because when you fast, when you abstain from food, your body kind of reacts against it. But after you've done it a few times, you'll find that you settle into a place where the hunger is less distracting, and your thoughts and prayers reach a level of clarity that you would not have realized if you've never done this before. And I really can't explain it to you because it's a properly basic experience. There's no other experience by which to reference it. But when you have developed the discipline of fasting and you stop to listen to God, it's like you've turned off all the noises in the house, and suddenly you can hear very clearly a bird chirping outside that you couldn't hear before. Fasting cuts off the distractions so you can focus on the real thing. It's perfectly legitimate to fast from other things than food, fast from television, fast from alcohol, fast from caffeine, fast from things that are distracting to you, because all those things push and pull at your daily moods and emotions and ability to listen. It's perfectly legitimate to fast from things other than food. So all that to say, if you've never tried fasting or Sabbath-keeping before, it'd be a shame to live your life without going to these very basic, very historic Christian disciplines and trying them once. The habit of Sabbath-keeping is a healthy one. And if you think you don't have time for it, you need it all the more. The spiritual discipline of fasting is a remarkable fine-tuning of our souls. And to ignore it or to bypass it is just a shame. So if you've never tried those before, I commend them to you. And I commend Heschel's book, The Sabbath, to you. They're really great disciplines that help shape our Christian walk.